everyone. Welcome as we warm up today. I see Daniela has joined us from the Mediterranean Diet Roundtable. Hi, Daniela. We'll wait for a few more until our guest author, signs on, because we are going to have so much fun today talking to Rossella Rago about cooking with Nonna. And this is the book that we are talking about today. Daniela, this was a family apron passed down from my mom, and one of my sisters embellished them and gave us each one. So I do wear it in honor of my mom, who was an Italian mom, and we're going to talk about an Italian grandma's as well today. I had a lot of fun cooking with this because one of the things that you will learn when Rossella joins us is that we both have Italian grandmothers. We both live with our grandmothers, or our grandmothers lived with us. Might be one way, might be the other, when we were in college. So there'll be a lot of fun talking about that, at least part of our shared heritage. So anyways. I learned a lot this week because every time we approach one of these live stories, our goal is to expand the palette perhaps, or try something new to make the Mediterranean diet just a bit more welcoming or approachable to all of us. Because I think each of us relates to this in the way that we were brought up. And so for me, that would be with an Italian grandmother. Okay, I see Rossella has joined. Let's see if we can get her in. I'm waving at you. I'm looking at your request. Everyone who's listening today, we are now live with Rossella Rago, who has a great background in Mediterranean cuisine, but especially with her Nonna. Welcome. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Now that you're with us, I'm so excited. You and I had a little bit of a chance to talk this week, and you gave me so many good tips when I was trying to prepare some recipes from your book.
And you
so again, this is the book we're talking about today. You with your beautiful, you are beautiful, but your grandmother is beautiful as well. Tell me a little bit about your grandma.
Well, my Nonna Romana is an immigrant from Puglia, Italy. So she's the oldest of 7 children. And when she was about 14, her father passed away. And she kind of became, you know, her mother's right arm in terms of cooking for everyone in the household, because my great grandmother Regina ran a small grocery store in our village in Italy. So she really took on the role of being like the head chef for, you know, these 6 other siblings that she had. Her younger sister Rosa did all the cleaning. My Nonna did all the cooking. So she kind of got thrown into this role of you know, head chef without anybody actually asking her. But she's just my role model, and she's, you know, the greatest influence in my life. And when I was attending college at St. John's University, I got to live with her because nice Italian girls don't dorm. So my parents threw me in Nonna's basement. We shared a bedroom for 4 years. It was quite an experience, but while that happened, I kind of call it, you know, my culinary education, because a lot of people ask if I've ever been to culinary school, and I haven't. So I learned basically everything that I know from my Nonna, and just from being inquisitive, from, you know, wanting to learn. And I always tell people, if you want to be a good cook, you will be, because it's the desire that's the most important thing.
Uh, there might be a little skill involved. I might be able to attest to that because I, one of the reasons that I'm doing this series is I'm a registered dietitian, right? I
Hmm.
love food. I've worked my whole life in some part of the healthcare and food industry, but I'm not a very good cook. So I think I went into the industry so I could hang out with chefs and eat their food. Um, but my grandma, I call her Grandma Frazzini, but we call her Mamu. So Mamu Frazzini came from Italy as well. And one story about her is that a man in the United States paid her passage, and she came over through Ellis Island. Some of my sisters have tracked all that. And when she got here, I'll be kind. I guess she said he didn't quite represent himself the way that she expected, that he
Oh,
was older and uglier than he was supposed to be.
that
So she
happens.
went to work to pay him back and then met my grandfather Tatu, and they married. So, and grandma came to live with us, or mama came to live with us. I lived at home when I went through college. And I remember making gnocchi with her on the table. And I still remember that hand movement that we did. So we share Italian grandmothers, but you
Yes.
end up with this beautiful name, Rossella Rago, and I end up with Mary Miller. So is it a family name or?
Rossella, Rossella actually it's the Italian name for scarlet. So like in Gone with the Wind in Italy, it's
Okay,
Cara. So it
I
means like,
love it.
and my name, according to Southern Italian naming traditions, your first two children are named after their paternal grandparents. So my older brother is Leonardo, after my father's father. And when it came time to name me, my mother had a bit of an issue because my paternal nonna's name is Pasqua.
Okay,
My mom was like, because it didn't matter how many, cousins there were, how many children there were. You would have, if you have a lot of siblings in a family, you end up with a bunch of first cousins that all have the same name.
I can relate.
So there was already a Pasqua, and my mother was like, since we already have one, do we really need another one? Because she wasn't really jazzed about the name Pasqua, which is the Italian word for Easter, and the name is Esther in English. And the way they would try and fix those kind of names is like they call you Pasquatina, and then your name is Tina for like the rest of your life.
Okay,
But your driver's license still will say Pasqua. So my father's sister Rosa had passed away quite young. She was only 32 when she passed away, or 31, I think, and her name was Rosa. So my mother said, instead of another Pasqua, maybe I'll name this baby after Rosa, and they came out with Rossella, and it was and everybody was happy, which is difficult in an Italian family. And then my middle name is Regina, after my great grandmother, and
uh-huh.
and my last name is Rago. My married name is Pesce, so that's another super Italian name.
Well, I'm only Italian on one side,
Mhm.
but I get it. I get just what you said. My two oldest sisters, I have 9 siblings. So my two oldest sisters have the middle names of Mary and Rose after each of my grandmothers. But then when more girls were born, because 7 of us are girls, then I became Mary and my younger sister became Rose. We got it as a first name. And I have a cousin, Mary Rita, and a cousin, Mary Beth. One's a year older, one's a year younger. And I go by Mary Angela because my mom was Angelina. So it's kind of both. My mom, Grandma Maria, my mom, Angelina. And there are so many Mary Millers in the world. So anyways, but let's start to talk about your book just a little bit because with this project, I kind of sit down and the first thing I do is read the cookbook. And when you sit down with the cookbook, you think you're going to be reading recipes, but that's not the case. I was enthralled with the Nonna stories in your book. How did you pick the Nonnas?
Yeah, I think that's what really made the entire project so much more special, because I didn't want it to just be a book of recipes, because my website already has all these recipes on it. I really wanted it to be about these extraordinary women who kind of lead extraordinary lives. And for so many of them, there are 25 ladies in the first book, there were 30 ladies in my second book. Nobody had really asked them, what's your story?
Wow.
Tell me about your life. And they all felt so special telling me, and all of the like most of them go through this thing was like, oh, this is boring, you don't want to know this. And it's like, no, I want to know. I want to know everything, because I think we all have this immigrant story as Italian Americans, and so few people delve into that part of our history, and it's such an important part of our history. And I wanted to write about these ladies in particular because it's very much this last generation of Nonna that we're going to experience, that we're experiencing now. Because, you know, my grandmother is 88. She was born in 1933, and she is one of the last that, you know, wears a house dress and doesn't wear makeup and doesn't dye her hair, and, you know, just saves everything in ricotta containers and stuff. And these ladies are so special. You know, they're different than the generation after them that's a little bit more modern, a little bit more you know, down with the times and hip, and, you know, maybe they own a Peloton. I don't know, but I really wanted to find a way to preserve these women and their stories. So I mean, how did I pick them? A lot of them found me, because when you embark on a project like this, you have an idea of how it's going to go, but you have no idea what you're going to end up with. So some ladies, you know, committed but then backed out, and then but it's like, oh, but call my cousin and she's a good nonna. And other people are like, you have to use my mother, she's fabulous, and then she has a friend. And so along the way, you know, the process becomes very organic to me, and I love finding people that way. It's stressful because, you know, you don't always know what's going on, but it all ended up really well. I really think my first book was one of these very serendipitous events in my life that I felt like kind of guided from like beyond into where I was supposed to. I had no idea how to write a book. I never thought I would ever write a book in my entire life. I never felt inclined, you know, in school at all. I never thought I was going to go to college. So for me to have published, you know, my first cookbook before I turned 30, it was such a big deal for me. It was such a milestone.
Well,
So
it is a big deal, and I'm impressed by that. But you did a great job, I think, with profiling them, because as I mentioned, I sat down that day to pick recipes, and I ended up having to read every story. I had to do every Nonna justice. So in your book, you kind of organize it by appetizers, soup, salads. Then you went into veggies and sides, and then the pasta or the first course and the second courses and the desserts, etc. So usually I pick two, but I was enthralled, so I picked three. And I just have to tell you this, as I mentioned, I'm only like an average cook. I'm a terrible baker. So I don't even own a mixer. So it was easy for me to rule out your dessert section, because so many I looked at, it says, fill your mixer. And I'm like, okay, well, that's out. But I picked baked mussel, which I think is one of your Nonna's recipes, right?
yeah.
And then I picked an eggplant recipe, and I picked a pasta recipe, which I'm very familiar with making pasta. That's one thing I can do pretty well, but because it had anchovies. So
Okay.
the two things that were really new to me were the pasta and the anchovies, and eggplant, because the only other way I ever made it was eggplant parm. So let's talk about this mussel recipe, baked mussels. And you warned me, Rossella. You said, Mary, if you haven't done them before, that's going to be a trip. But I thought, whoa.
But you
I
did it
anyway. So I went out to buy baked mussels, to buy mussels. I had to go to two stores for the first thing, because I live here in Columbus, Ohio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love mussels, and I have them out often, but I had never made them. And oh my goodness, cracking open those mussels was a trip. So
Yeah.
two things I'm going to tell people. If you do mussels, I looked it up on the internet. It said, use a clam knife. I'm like, what? I thought I had every kitchen gadget in the world, because I'm not a good cook, so I think the gadgets will help me. And I didn't have a clam knife, so I used a paring knife that's very sharp, but probably not thick enough. But I owe you something, and I'm going to tell you what I owe you. I don't know if you can see this finger. There's a scar on it. So that's from a kitchen accident, apparently, when I was a baby. And I grew up with that scar. And for a long time, I thought that's how people told their right hand from their left, because you would have a scar on your right thumb. I didn't know that not everybody did. So I'm very careful in the kitchen. But if I didn't have these gloves from my mandolin,
Oh,
I would have lost this fingertip. This one right here, I owe you, Rossella, because I was so careful, but I would have sliced that with one of those mussels.
that glove is probably a really good idea for anyone that, you know, is just starting out with opening mussels, because it's not easy to like get the, you know, to kind of move the two shells apart and get your knife right under there and, you know, kind of cut all the way around the mussel. And you want to be careful because you don't want to like lose too much juice or anything. You want to separate the fruit. You know, you can also steam them on the stove a little bit and get them open, reserve the juice, but it's not quite the same. So I'm very proud of you that you took that challenge on and you know, completed it. And
I mangled a few.
It looked like it turned out great.
Yeah, I mangled a few on my way to making these mussels. I timed myself. So again, I didn't have a large choice of mussels, right? The first store had none. The second store, I had to buy them. I think I would love to be able to pick them myself. So kind of like you pick produce, so you could look for ones with the little opening, but the man behind the counter picked my mussels for me. So it took me about, I started at 2:07 in the afternoon and I finished about 2:30. So it was about a minute a mussel, but I definitely got better as I went on, okay?
It's
and
not
for,
a process.
yeah, for those of you who haven't made them, this to me was kind of like the same, other than shelling or opening them, kind of like making stuffed mushrooms, you know, similar topping, put them in, bake them off. They were delicious. So worth the effort.
Yeah, well, the thing is that the breading that goes on top of it is kind of a batter because there's egg in it.
Okay.
So, it's called Batuto in Italian, in Pugliese cuisine.
Say that again.
Batuto.
Okay.
And you kind of stuff each mussel with it. So it's different than like a baked clam that's very breadcrumby. This is much softer. So it bakes and kind of puffs up in the oven.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful texture to go over mussels. And in Puglia, in the village that we come from, mussels are kind of just like, you know, when my nonna was growing up, they were probably the cheapest seafood that you could buy. They were very, very plentiful. So they, you know, especially in the summertime, you just had to find ways to use all the mussels. Most of the time that was, you know, what you could afford, what you could get a lot of if you had big families. Like a lot of people had big families back then. So they would make, you know, spaghetti con le cozze and cozze con battuto and just mussels every which way you can figure out.
Well, the other thing that I found was that when I was paging through the book, the picture was gorgeous. And I said, oh, I have to try these. Yeah. And I was surprised because my food photography skills are only slightly better than my cooking skills, but I thought my picture came out pretty good. But it was that beautiful photo that really made me want to try your Nonna's mussels. So I was going to ask you, because I hate to waste food, right? What to do with the leftovers? But there were two of us and we ate the entire 2 dozen. So there were no leftovers to ask about. But have you ever had to use the leftovers, or any suggestions on that?
Like leftover mussels?
Mussels, right.
Like that we didn't eat,
that
or
you cooked, no, that you cooked already. Like if we had not eaten the entire 2 dozen that evening.
Oh, those reheat beautifully, actually.
Okay, good to know.
Because that breading kind of has a chance to settle.
Mm-hmm.
Topping kind of has a chance to settle. So it's almost like the texture of a frittata.
Right, like with the egg in it. Okay.
So the next day, it's really, really good. I recommend it.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to try then. We're going to move on to your next recipe. Well, the one in your book. This was not your Nonna's recipe.
Okay.
It was mushroom style eggplant. And you, when we talked, you said, Mary, you know, try my Nonna's recipe. I think it was for an eggplant parm, and I looked at it. It was a work of art. And if I tried to make that recipe, Rossella, I would still be in the kitchen. So that was kind of like beyond my capabilities. But I tried this one, which was much simpler. But I was curious because I'm like, it's called mushroom style, but there's no mushrooms in it. So right. Is there a reason, or is it just an alternative to the way you cook mushrooms?
So that recipe, the melanzane al funghetto, that is Nonna Rosa's recipe, and that is actually one of the nonnas that lives in on the Amalfi Coast, essentially.
Okay.
So she's a wonderful lady that I cook with on my culinary tours back before times I used to guide these wonderful culinary tours in Puglia and on the Amalfi Coast. And she would be kind of my my nonna teacher that would come in and teach my groups with me. And that was one of her famous side dishes that she would make every single time. It's so easy, it's so flavorful. I mean, it helps when you have like eggplant and tomatoes and basil from the Amalfi Coast that are just so much more flavorful and fragrant.
I can imagine.
But the name, it's a classic Neapolitan dish. The name actually comes from the style. It's melanzane al funghetto, means a mushroom style, and it's actually because of the way that they cut the eggplant into like the little matchsticks that they say resembles, mushrooms, and mushrooms are frequently cooked in the same way on the Amalfi Coast, like in that light tomato sauce. So they didn't feel like coming up with another name, so they just gave it a name. It worked.
I was just curious. I did have one question. Oh, go ahead.
On my website, I actually have a recipe for a very similar variation of that, but I bake the eggplant in the oven. So instead of frying the eggplant, which is delicious, but I roast it in the oven and then toss it in that light tomato sauce, which is actually very good.
Well, I had a question about that. So when I put it on the stove with the olive oil, should it be immersed in the olive oil? Like how deep should the olive oil be, or should it be more like sauteing? I wasn't quite sure what to do there, or if I did that part correctly.
You can deep fry it a
Okay.
little bit faster. Eggplant does soak up quite a bit of oil, so and depends, on what kind of eggplant you have, if it's like being very absorbent that day or not. But kind of meet it in the middle. I wouldn't do like fully submerged. If you go to a restaurant and you order mushroom style eggplant, they threw that in the deep fryer. But in your home, you want to have enough oil, so it's going to soak up oil, but it's also going to brown the eggplant and cook the eggplant adequately. So if you see that it's sucking up oil, just add more, and you need to fry the eggplant for that recipe until they're like golden brown, until they're not colored.
Yeah. Well, again, this was a simple recipe, but delicious. So I was able to master this one. Those were just a few of the questions I have. And I did purge, in your words, I think, purge the eggplant in terms of letting it salt and drain after I cut it. But you probably didn't need to do that, because it really, as you mentioned, your Nonna never did. And I didn't get that much liquid out of it. I was just trying to be a good, student chef here. So
got it. So here's the thing with that move. I've never really tasted a bitter eggplant. Other people swear they have. My Nonna did not do that. That was not part of her technique in anything. The thing is that really came into play many years ago when eggplants were grown, next to a lot of other vegetables, and they would absorb maybe the acidity from other vegetables. Today, with farming the way it is, eggplant is actually picked at the height of its freshness, so the likelihood that it's going to be acidic or bitter or something is very low.
Okay, well, good to know. Great, thank you.
Tomatoes, because some people swear tomatoes are acidic and need sugar or need bicarbonate or something, but the tomatoes that you're buying, especially canned tomatoes, anything like a canned product, that's our number one, and number two, picked at the height of its freshness. So if it's something that you want to do out of tradition, I say do it. If it's something that your Nonna did and you want to do it the way your Nonna did it, go for it. If it makes you happy.
All right. Well, we tried one more then. Now I'm going to say it. Orecchiette. Did I say that correctly?
Pretty good.
Okay. It's orecchiette with broccoli rabe. And rabe is R-A-B-E for those that don't know that. And is that the same as broccolini? Or is that something different? Okay.
No. So in Italian, the name for broccoli rabe is cime di rapa. So in English, they call it broccoli rabe. I call it broccoli rabe because my channel, my website is in English. Cima di rapa is the correct Italian term. I think rabe is just one of those words that kind of got mangled in translation. When British people started trying to translate Italian words into English, they were like, oh, let's just say Rob or something. So, yeah, this is probably the single most pugliese dish in existence. This dish is synonymous with the region of Puglia, where I'm from. So every pugliese person from the region of Puglia knows how to make this dish. Probably makes it slightly differently also.
Okay.
Because that's every recipe. I always say Italy did not have an official language until its unification in the early 1860s. They had 600 languages before that, plus. So the idea that we have one recipe to make anything is ridiculous.
I love it. So the reason I chose this, though, was because it had anchovies in it. So again, I'm here in the Midwest. I always do something every week, like do some background. So I always ask 10 people something about what I'm going to do. So I chose anchovies, and I asked 10 people, have you ever cooked anchovies? And only one, my sister who's married to a Greek man, said I cooked with anchovy paste. The other 9 said no, and 6 said I would absolutely never eat an anchovy. One actually had a visceral reaction.
So you know what you do for those people?
Okay.
You lie, and you say there's no anchovies in it. Because the way you make this recipe, when it says to saute the garlic and oil and the little red pepper, and then you melt the anchovies, they're going to totally disintegrate, and you barely taste anchovy. You don't taste a fishy anchovy taste if you do it right. If you wait for them to totally liquefy, you really just taste, another layer of flavor. But there's no way, if they don't know that it's anchovies and they hate anchovies, there's no way they're going to taste it and be like, there's anchovies in this, I know.
I would agree with you, because I made this one and ate it myself. But now don't laugh, okay? When you say fillets of anchovy, do you mean the ones in a little tin?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Because I was looking for them behind the seafood case. Oh. And he said, no, they're down there. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. I want to make sure I bought the right anchovies. And also when I asked people, again, my family's half Italian, they said, anchovies aren't Italian. Why are you using them? But they are. I looked them up. They said they're an ancient Roman food, and that they were as expensive and as prized as the best perfumes. Ooh. 1,000 years ago. So anchovies are, I guess, an Italian food.
Absolutely.
Now, my dietitian friends say, well, they're high in salt and they're high in sodium. And I think it's important to not just take things at face value. So I looked at the little tin, and really they're not that high in calorie. And you only use 3 in this recipe. And the whole tin, I think, only had something like, 95 calories. That's nothing. And if you only use 3 anchovies, which is 1/3 of a can, that's 800 milligrams of sodium for those who are concerned. And even a low sodium diet, you're allowed 2,000 milligrams a day. So if you're doing it right, and they're also, I think, omega-3 fatty acids. So
my mother would actually eat anchovies every time. My mother's an actress.
Okay.
So every time she would have like a performance, she would eat anchovies because she swears that they would soothe her throat and make her voice, smoother and stuff. I don't know,
but so they are Italian. They're not bad for you, right? And they pack a lot of flavor once you cook it. The one question I had for you is that when you said when you cook the pasta, reserve a cup of water, and then I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with that water. Was that to add to the pasta once I added it to the seasonings?
Right. So whenever it's always a good idea to save pasta water for any recipe. Okay. I think, especially when you're making like a white sauce, like a sauce with no tomato in it. And that is because if you need it, and that means if your pan seems very dry, if you add some of the pasta water has all the starch that the pasta releases in it. So
Okay.
it can not only, you know, just keep your pasta from coming out too dry, but it can also add some nice body to your sauce, especially because a white sauce doesn't have, you know, the consistency of a tomato sauce. So it's just like for emergency purposes, because, you know, you can tell people to cook on a certain flame or whatever, but sometimes their stove is a little stronger, the flame's a little higher, the liquid's evaporating faster, and next thing you know, your pan's a little dry and you need some pasta water. So for
I
emergency,
love it.
just in case, it's always a good idea to reserve some pasta water.
Oh my goodness. Well, my reminder alarm went off, but I've just had so much fun talking to you today, and I've certainly learned how to shuck a mussel, right? How to cook eggplant in a different way besides Parmesan, and how to at least cook with anchovies, okay? And to maybe convince a few other people to cook with anchovies. Rossella Rago, thank you so much for joining us on the Mediterranean Diet Live Kitchen Stories and for cooking up a conversation with Mary Angela this week. I so enjoyed not only trying your recipes, but thank you for doing tribute to our Italian nonnas. Have a great one.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Mary Angela.
It was so much fun. Bye, everyone. And you can watch this live right now, or you can see it later on the website. Thank you. Have a great one, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.